The Elden Ring DLC has brought with it quite a variety of weapons, including new weapon archetypes. And if you look online, you would think that every single one of them is either overpowered or broken in some shape or form. But when it comes to straightforwardness and just reliability, I feel like there's one that stands out, and that is Rakshasa's Great Katana. While all three of the newly introduced Great Katanas bring something to the table, this one in particular stands out for a few reasons. For starters, it's the only Great Katana to offer hyper armor to the player, which is very beneficial for the DLC. And on top of that, its unique skill, Weed Cutter, is excellent for crowd control and being able to build up damage quickly for as long as you have stamina. So with all that being said, let's get right into the build. Starting off with the weapon itself. As I mentioned earlier, attacking with it will help prevent the player from being staggered, at the expense of taking increased damage. Don't worry, this is negligible. Feel free to use whatever armor that you like. However, I find that the Rakshasa armor set is perfect as it helps provide extra damage output per piece, and the only extra damage that you're taking is due to the lower resistances compared to other armors in the same weight class. For talismans, we have Millicent's Prosthesis for the extra dexterity and successive attack damage, Shard of Alexander because the weapon skill is going to be crucial here, the two-handed sword talisman as we will be two-handing the weapon the entire time, and finally Dragon Crest Great Shield for the mitigation of the negative effects of the armor and weapon, which you can find at the Eastern Mausoleum located in the new DLC. For cracked tiers, I decided to go with damage negation and increased poise damage because it's all about being relentless with this build. The stats are as follows: 60 vigor, 23 mind, 30 endurance, 12 strength, which is the minimum requirement of the weapon, 80 dexterity because it scales primarily off of dexterity. It's actually 75 without the Millicent Prosthesis, and the rest of the stats don't really matter, they're just where they are because of the starting class that I went with. There will be no spoilers in regards to the bosses of the DLC, so don't worry about that. However, I will be facing different enemies within the DLC and in the base game, just to truly showcase how this build functions. For example, here I wanted to really emphasize the unique skill, because people talk about the moveset of this weapon, which is great, as well as its poke attacks, but the weapon skill itself has such great coverage and damage potential that if you're not using it, you're doing yourself a disservice. This will be made even more evident later on in the PvP portion of the video, as I'm sure some of you are curious whether a weapon is not only serviceable in the single player, but the multiplayer aspect as well, so I hope it provides further insight in that regard. Honestly, this weapon skill cannot be overstated. Even against armored enemies like knights, you can apply constant pressure, and if they decide to go on defense with a shield or blocks, you hit them with a jump attack, and it's game over. This even applies to the newer Fire Knights, who just love to spam projectiles at you, making your life miserable. Now you could just cut them down to size and watch them as they struggle to counterattack. Boy, does it feel good. Now, when it comes to boss battles, or enemies who are practically bosses, you know, the ones that are unpredictable, have sporadic movements, and that constant aggression, well, your playstyle is going to be more or less the same. However, unlike other builds, you want to be extra aware of when it's worth trading blows. Because you won't be staggered frequently, you could just lose yourself in a constant string of attacks and not realize, oh, my health bar is going closer and closer to zero. So be able to mix in some regular hits, take advantage of the pokes, jump attacks, what have you. Mix it up and you'll be okay. Because while the point of this build is to be practically as bloodthirsty as possible, it's important to take a step back and understand when it's time to strike and when it's time to reevaluate the situation. Like when you're being ganged up on, for example. It's also why I don't rely on any buffs for this build. Sure, you can put points into faith at higher levels, equip the usual incantations to get the weapon's attack rating as high as possible, but it's not really necessary. And honestly defeats the purpose, because you're going to find moments where you have to rebuff, and those moments will just make you vulnerable. The main objective of the build is to be as straightforward as possible while promoting an aggressive playstyle. That doesn't mean there's a wrong way of accomplishing this. It's just that I feel this is the most optimal route of achieving that goal. So, how does this weapon fare in PvP? It's just as good, really. Even against a popular build like this, which uses the backhand blades, it more than holds its own. Yeah, remember when I said the weapon skill was good? There you go. Even against mage builds that are focused primarily on status effects or ranged attacks, you have no problem closing the gap and just going in and unleashing devastation. Going up against dual wielders is interesting because if they get too greedy, you can follow up with the weapon skill, or just hit them at range with the poke attack. This weapon is especially satisfying to use against players who have no manners and attack you right out the gate as you greet them. I think that sums up everything. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, take care.